Hi everyone, it's Jackie at Spare Room Studio. I'm back today to colour in my first ever Rita Berman book. Now, in the recent Prime Day sales, I didn't go crazy, but I bought myself a couple of things. I found that on Australian Amazon, there wasn't really an awful lot of brilliant deals that made me sort of want to rush off and spend money, but I did buy a couple of Rita Berman books because I don't own any, and they are quite expensive here in Australia for some reason. I don't know why, but when I saw these two books had been marked right down, I grabbed them because the Mein Reise durch Europa is the main one that I wanted, so I was pleased to get that. And I also picked up this one. I won't try to pronounce it, but most people would know what it is by now because it has been around for a while. I'm a bit late to the Rita Berman party. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to colour in this page here because it's quite quirky and fun. It's got some knitting needles and so on, and I do like to crochet. And I attend a craft group where the ladies are knitting. I try to knit myself, so I quite like this quirky little drawing. And I'm going to use Derwent Inktense to start with. I haven't used my Inktense pencils for quite a few pages now, so I'm going to have a go with the Derwent Inktense. I've never worked in this book before, obviously. I've never worked in a Rita Berman book before, so I have no idea what the paper's going to be like. It feels quite thin. I'm not invested in that page behind, so if it bleeds through, I'm not overly concerned. I've got a couple of blotter sheets underneath, and I'll dive in. So I've got a water brush with me, my favourite water brush, which is a no-name budget brand water brush that's starting to get quite frayed and furry now, but I've got that with me, and I have a couple of very small fine tip brushes for some of the details, and a pot of water if I need to work that way, and I will get started. So let me just get a piece of paper towel in my hand. I like to have one really close by. So I think I'll get started on the trees first. I want to do some different greens, and I'm going to start with green aquamarine and teal green first, I think, and also to go into that I'm going to mix in some apple green. So hopefully I am all on camera here. It's quite a small book. I'm surprised at how small the books are actually. I have seen them in other people's collections. I was lucky enough to go up and meet Helen from Instagram, and Helen's got a lovely collection of books, so I got to see some different books that she had that are not in my collection. And I think I've seen a couple of Rita Berman books when I was overseas. I went to Switzerland last year, and I think I saw a couple there, but they were quite expensive, even over there as well. And I just held off because unless a book really, really grabs me, I like to hold off and see if I can get it at a reduced price. It's that frugal nature coming out again. And if I love a book, I'll just dive in and buy it. But if I'm a little bit hesitant, I've learnt to wait because sometimes there's a good reason why you're hesitant. And I've made plenty of impulse buys in the past that I've later regretted, so I've learnt to slow down a little bit from hitting the buy now button. and I don't wish to offend anybody, but I really love seeing Rita Berman's work. Like, her own work is just amazing. It's so vibrant, it's so lively. I enjoy looking at people's work when it comes up in my Instagram feed, and it always has a great sense of fun about it and vibrancy, and I do like that. But I have to say, when I first got this book and flipped through it, I was a little bit underwhelmed, and I feel like it's the sort of book maybe once I started working in, it would grow on me a little bit more. So I don't wish to offend anybody by that opinion, and it's certainly not a reflection of Rita's artwork, because she's an amazing artist. This one here is Spring Green. And if I forgot to mention at the beginning, I have the original 72 set of Derwent Inktense. I haven't upgraded just yet. I think there was a deal for Prime Day for some Derwent Inktense. I'm not sure if it was the blocks or the pencils, and I held off because I've had these pencils for many years, and you can see they look like they've barely been touched, and that's because you really do get great value out of your Inktense pencil. The pigment goes a very long way, especially with the way that I'm using them, and I just couldn't really justify adding more to my collection at this moment. The new colours, if you buy them, buy them open stock, seem quite pricey still at the moment. And I've got by so far with what I have with these Inktense, so I figure I can manage a bit longer, by combining them with water-based markers and watercolour pencils and other products. I've really got far too many supplies already that are not getting used, so I felt that the investment for another set, or the bigger set, really wasn't warranted at this moment, even though they were a good buy. And I'm running out of storage space. Until I can get my spare room back and turn it back into a little studio, I'm really struggling for storage options at the moment. So I'd just like to say, I'm certainly no martyr. I have been guilty in the past of purchasing, way too many things and then having buyer's remorse and all that sort of thing. It's been a long-term lesson for me to get to this point where I'm finally starting to show some restraint, because when it comes to my hobbies, and I'm the same with my crochet and yarn supplies as well, I get really excited and gung-ho when I find a new hobby, and I just have to have everything. And I've been creating artwork and so on for over 20 years now, and so I have collected quite the sizable collection of bits and bobs and doodads and all the things that you could possibly think of. And then I've given a lot away already, because I just found that a lot of it was not really required and not really my thing. I jumped in a little bit too soon with buying some things. So I'm certainly not casting judgment on anybody else who likes purchasing stuff is as much of the enjoyment of the hobby as the colouring itself. But it's, you know, at this point in my life, that's not for me. Now, something I like to do with the Inktense pencil is, no matter what I'm working with, this sherbet lemon is quite a, it's not fluorescent or neon, but it's a very vibrant yellow. And I sometimes find that I like to just put a little touch of that into the wet areas of these deeper colours, and it just gives a nice little lift. And then even going over some of the dry areas, I'll do the same thing. And it's very much personal preference, but it's just something that I like to do. I like the touch of it, and it just gives things a bit of a lift. So if you're new to the channel, you haven't seen me work before, I do like to use a lot of water. I do like to push the paper to its limits. And this is my favourite way of working with Inktense pencils that I'm showing you at the moment. I like to wet the paper. Then I like to wet the tip of the pencil with my water brush. And with that colour, I like to touch it to the wet paper and let the colours bleed. And then I get a contrasting colour, or even a complementary blending colour. And while it's all wet, I let that go into there as well and let it do its thing. I have a yellowy green here, which is the apple green. And I just let it all blend on the paper. My thought is with some of these smaller details that I might like to try a glazed pen or a metallic pen or a sparkly pen, something to bring in a bit of fun, sparkle and brightness to, you know, shine to the page. This is very whimsical style, and if you've ever looked at Rita's original artworks, it's so vibrant and fun. Lots of bright colour going on. That's sort of the feeling that I want to get here as well. And then once that first layer has started to dry, I start to then look at where do I need to add extra colour, where do I need to deepen up the colour, and you know, come back later with some more, because you can keep layering up the Inktense. Once that wash is dry, it should be permanent, and so when you come back and you overlay other colours on top of it, it shouldn't move. Now I say shouldn't because sometimes I have known it to not be fully activated, and then I come back later and put more water and colours on it, and it does in fact move. And some colours might be a little bit more likely for that to happen, but in general, if you're using them quite lightly and you fully activate it with the water, once it dries, it is meant to be permanent. So here I'm wetting the tip of the pencil with the water brush, lifting that bit of colour, and I'm essentially colouring in with a brush, if that's how you want to think about it. I'm just using that water brush like I would a pencil, and I'm applying it to dry paper. So the colour is a little bit more saturated and dense than when I do it the other way. When I drop it into the wet paper, I'll do some here, it's not quite as vibrant. It's a bit more like a watercolour look. And the colour is it's not like block colouring where it's saturated and it's all even. When I put it into the wet paper, it is much more irregular. Basically just like watercolour. Now when you've got that colour down, if you decide that it's a little bit too dense and a little bit too vibrant, while it is still wet, you can put some clean water onto it, and that will help lighten that up a little bit, because it just lightens up that pigment a little bit more. Once it starts to dry though, it won't achieve much. It has to be done while it is still wet. So with some of those lighter areas, it's okay to go over these other details if you know that you're going to be coming back with a darker colour later. So for example, the little leaves here on the flowers are going to be a darker green. Then it's okay to go over those things when you know that you're definitely going to be coming back with a darker colour over the top. Don't worry about going around things. Now it looks like this is actually part of a double spread, but I'm only going to do this side at this stage. I hope that the video doesn't end up too long. We're already at 17 minutes now and we haven't got an awful lot done. I've been whittering on a little bit too much and not working fast enough. Now something else when I work this way with the water-based products is I don't always worry about going right up to the edges of things. And if I'm going to use pencil later, I can always put some pencil over the top of it maybe, but I actually like the look sometimes of having like a little white halo around things where you haven't quite gone up to the edges. And that can actually look quite interesting as a little sort of design technique, I suppose you could call it. I'm just bringing in that little change of green there just for some variation. Don't want it all looking too solid and too samey. So what I like about the Inktense pencils is that they are vibrant enough that you can quite often just work with these on their own and not introduce any other products over the top. Or you can wash, do some very light washy effects with them. And then you can bring in some details with coloured pencils or fine liners, markers, gel pens, some sparkle. You've got some options to do other stuff with them. So they are quite a versatile little pencil to have in your collection. You can, of course, colour directly onto the paper and then just do a little bit here because I don't personally like it myself, but you can colour directly onto the paper with the pencil and then activate that with a wet brush, whether you use a water brush or a regular brush and a pot of water, that is entirely up to you. But I'm not a fan of the way that looks. I use it occasionally, but I prefer the way it looks when I do it this way. And it's very much a personal preference, so I encourage everybody to try various ways of working with their Inktense pencils until they find what it is that they really enjoy. And of course you can do all the different ways. You don't have to lock yourself into just one method of working. And the paper's getting to the point where it's really starting to struggle with the amount of water there. I'm pushing that to its limit. And what I thought I might do is I want to do something a little bit fun. I'm going to use fuchsia. And I want this ball of yarn I've got fuchsia, sienna gold and Sicilian yellow. Sienna gold is my absolute favourite colour, which is why that pencil is so much shorter than all the others. I can't tell you what it is about this particular colour that I like so much, but it is just really appealing to me. And I'm going to make that look like it's a multicoloured ball of yarn because it has come from a multicoloured sheep. What I like to do with the Inktense in a lot of books is to start off a little bit more on the subdued side, and when I'm sure that I've got the right colours, then I will come back and keep adding more and more until it gets darker and darker and more vibrant. But I prefer to start off a little bit more subdued until I'm sure that that's the right colour. And I'm also going to bring in a little bit of mid vermilion. Just to deepen up some of that pink. And then I'm going to use that sherbet lemon. Just cleaning that off a little bit because I've got a bit of the green when I've used a dirty brush. Got a bit of green in there and I don't want the green in my sheet. We're going to put a little bit of that in there as well. And I keep the pencils in my hand like this, and I just keep dabbing from brush, the brush from tip to tip until all those colours are in there. And I'm going to do this little one here in the sienna gold. I apologise if you can hear any banging and knocking again in the background because it is another windy day here. Sunny and very nice, but very windy. And that same colour I'm going to put into the centre of the flowers. And I'm going to make this sheep here Sicilian yellow. This is the second most used colour in my set here. If I have any complaints about the Inktense set, and I'm talking about the 72 set because I don't have those new colours, is that most of the colours are very vibrant and there's nothing really neutral in there. So I tend to use the tan and the mustard, sort of to tone down the oranges and the yellows, because there's nothing really in between. What you can do is once it's all dry, you can come back with your pencil, and I'm thinking particularly the Prismacolor white pencil, and you can put highlights, re-establish some highlights, or you can use a white acrylic paint pen or something like that. And I'm going to use some of these colours in the tree trunks. So although it's super vibrant, it's quite a limited palette really. So just showing you that sometimes if the paper is a little bit damp, I will come and do a little bit of pencil into the damp paper like this, and then I blend the hard edges out with the damp brush. That's what I do if I want something that's a little bit more saturated and solid looking. So that's into the wet paper now. So if you're going to do that, you don't want a sharp tip on your pencil, you only want a fairly blunt end on your pencil, or you'll tear the paper up. Most of the time I would say to you, don't use any sort of pencil on wet paper, but this is the exception when you've got a watercolour pencil or an Inktense pencil and you have a blunt tip. So that's tan that I'm using there. That's the only time I suggest using a pencil on wet paper, otherwise you'll tear it up. So I tend to do that when I decided that there's an area that I want to be much darker. I will dampen it off and then use the pencil in that damp paper. And that's really the only time that I like to use the Inktense pencils as a pencil. And then I just come back with the tip of the water brush that's damp and just sort of dab at that until, you know, it blends a little bit better and there's no real hard edge. Now this technique I do in lots of different books, so it's not just, you know, a Rita Berman book that it will suit. Just be aware that it could bleed through. In fact, we'll just check the page now and see at half an hour whether I've got any bleed through. It's quite wet there, but there's not much colour come through. It's a bit shadowy, but you might be able to see that that's quite wet. I'm not invested in that page, so I don't mind if we sacrifice that one. So if that water brush is just a little bit too difficult for you, depending on how big your water brush is, this is where I recommend that you have some water and a small brush. And I'll be reaching across here, I'm sorry, but that's the way my setup is. I can't do much better with that. So the brush is wet and I'm still lifting the colour off of there and basically treating it like a pencil. Now I'd like to say, if you haven't painted much in the past, and it doesn't matter what sort of painting, but if you haven't used a brush and painted very much in the past, be prepared that working in such a fine manner does take a little bit of practice. Don't be disheartened if your brush skills are not great to start with. You need to sort of go slowly and carefully when it is such a small area. Now I'm just thinking in hindsight, I probably should have done the background sky before I went in doing this. I'd recommend you do that yourselves. You do your background sky before you do all of these other sorts of details. That's getting a bit dry. And it's a little bit of a art to discovering just how much water your brush can hold and what that paint's like, because the wetter the brush, you're going to get different effects than when you're working with a drier brush. So all those things do require a little bit of practice. So I suggest that you don't jump in and try a new skill out when you've already got, you know, a fair way along in a page and you're really happy with it. That's not the time to start experimenting with new techniques. So I've gone right out of the lines there. So I'm just going to get my brush a bit wetter and I'm actually going to try and blend that in now. And that's how I'll get around that. So that's too dry, it wasn't picking any colour up. Now, before you get disappointed and you think, okay, I've used a brush and it's not working like Jackie's doing, I did study watercolour classes or go and attend watercolour classes for several years, and I painted and drew my own original art and worked with a brush like this way for quite a few years. So this isn't something new that I've just picked up. And I'm still going over all the lines because as I'm getting older, my fine motor skills are nowhere near as good as they used to be, nor is my eyesight. But I say that to you because I know that there's going to be someone who said, you know, how come mine didn't look like yours did? And it might be the first time that person's tried to paint with a small paintbrush like this. So give yourself some grace and time to learn a new skill. And don't be expecting too much. Don't put the pressure on yourself. As I say, don't get 3/4 of the way through a page and then decide to try this and get really upset because you've decided that you've ruined it. So don't put that pressure on yourself. Do some practicing first in an old book. Whether you have your, what I talk about, your playbook, where you try new techniques and new supplies in before you go putting them in your precious books. Go and do it somewhere else first, or the back of the book, sketchbook, wherever. Just have a play somewhere else before you commit to doing something like this in one of your favourite books. And allow yourself a little bit of time. What I would also like to say is that you can get some pretty good quality cheap brushes. I didn't pay a lot for this one. I can't remember where it came from off the top of my head, but it wasn't an expensive one. But generally, if you buy them through an art store, they're going to be a reasonable quality, whereas if you get a cheap, very cheap one offline, or, I'd sort of liken them to what you get with kids' books and what have you. They're not going to work. If they have a really cheap nylon tip, I'll see if I've got something that I can try and explain what I'm talking about. Okay, here you go. This came as a freebie with something. See if we can get it open. If they're really, really cheap nylon, and you can see the shape of this brush before it's even been used, that's not going to a very good point. It's coming apart easily. That's not going to be a great result painting with that tip. Sometimes when you get them and they're new, they've got a coating on them that helps that tip stay formed while it's in transit. So you definitely want to wash that off first. Now that's marginally better, but it's not great. So you're not going to get a good result with that. And sometimes, depending on the nylon, it won't even hold a lot of water. So, have a little look at maybe going into an art store and just buying one smaller fine tip. This one wasn't from an art store. I can't remember where it was from, but it is a decent tip that it's got on it. Don't leave your brushes standing in a pot like that either, because it will bend the tip and bend it out of shape permanently. And when you've finished working with your brush, clean your brush off and reform it to a point like that and let it dry. And they're best stored, when they're dry, they're best stored like this. Don't store them that way when they're wet, because the water can travel down into the inside here and loosen all the glue and all that sort of thing. This is quite an old brush, but I bought this from an art store. And this one holds a lot of water. And even though it's old, you can see that when it's wet, it can be formed to a fairly decent tip, and it holds its shape. I hope that you're seeing that. So it's just a few little tips about brush care and so on. Always clean them, reform the tip, let it dry somewhere on a piece of paper towel, like that, and then store it that way. Don't ever store them that way, because it will bend the tips out of shape and they're going to be no good next time you come to use them. So just a little bit of an idea there for you. So keep some of those things in mind. If you ever try something new and your initial impulse is to think, oh, mine doesn't look like hers, what happened? Why is that? I'm no good. Don't go down that road until you've considered all these other things first. One, you don't need to have really expensive materials. You can find some great bargain things and get by with some bargain things, but they're only going to be capable of so much. And so before you blame it on yourself, think, are you using the same quality tools? You know, if I started comparing myself to somebody on YouTube or Instagram who's a full-time watercolourist and they've got amazing brushes that they've spent an absolute mint on, and then I look at my result and I think, oh, that's pretty average. It's not always just technical skill. It will be that my tools and my materials have let me down. If I'm watching someone who's created a beautiful watercolour and they've used quality artist pigment watercolours and they're on great paper, you know, they've got good quality watercolour brushes, and here I am using my Derwent Inktense in a colouring book with paper that I have no idea what its origin is, and it's definitely not watercolour. There is no way that even if my skill was of an equal level, there's no way that I'm going to get equivalent results. So I just say that because, you know, I know people get discouraged when they watch colour-alongs and they follow the colour-along to the T and they do everything exactly the same as the person, or what they perceive is exactly the same as the person that they're watching. You know, even if they have got the same materials, it's never going to look exactly the same. But a lot of the time we don't have the same materials, and then we wonder why we're not getting the same results. And that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to do a colour along. I'm going to introduce some iris blue now for the sky. It's a little bit why I'm hesitant to do a proper full colour along for you. Because even if we have the same book, I live in Australia, and the majority of the people who view my videos are living in the United States or the UK. That's the majority, and then there's some of you that are from all over the rest of the world, and our books are not coming from the same print shops. They're being printed in different places with different supplies, different ink, different paper. And I dare say some of our supplies might even get made in different places. I don't know. I haven't looked into that fully. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. But all of these things will affect your results. And I know people get really disappointed when they can't match the results when they follow a colour along. And so that's why I'd rather say to you, please have a look at the techniques that I'm using and use it as a jumping off point, a starting point. to finding your own way, your own look, and your own, signature style. This is really just a starting point. And I hope that, you don't think to yourself that your page is going to look the same if you use precisely the same technique as me. Because I've worked this way now, or developing this way now, for over 20 years. And I know that some of you have only just been colouring for a couple of years. You've had no art training. And I know that there are some people who've got natural abilities and they don't need to go to art classes. They basically can just sort of do this stuff themselves because they've just got a natural eye for colour, or an adventurous technique that they've discovered, or whatever. But those people are quite few and far between. And a lot of people like to say, oh yeah, I just do this. I just develop this way. And they might not tell you that they've been doing it for a long time. So keep all those things in mind when you're trying new stuff out. And if you've bought yourself a brush that, isn't the cheapest brush, it's, budget, but it's not the cheapest, and you like it, you love working this way, perhaps go and visit an art store and talk to somebody and ask what do they recommend would be a good brush when you explain what you want to do with it. And the staff in the art store can help you with a lot of information. And that's something that you can't pick up from, Amazon. And there are some things that are worth paying for. And personally, I would say watercolour brushes are something that are worth investing in if it's a style that you're going to work with a lot and you're going to look after it, because you do need to care for it. You do need to make sure that you clean them properly, store them correctly, and you will get years and years out of your brushes. But if you're not going to be into it to that point, I would say go to an art store, look for something that's, more of the lower priced range. There are many different types of brushes, because you get brushes that are suited for oil painting, you get brushes that are suited for acrylic, and sometimes if you're using the wrong brush and trying to do watercolour with it, it's not going to work that well for you either. So perhaps, talking to someone in an art store, they'll point you in the right direction, so at least you don't, make that mistake. So while I think that colouring doesn't need to be complicated, we're talking about colouring books here. If you're into your hobby seriously enough, though, that you've invested some decent money into, good paints, good pencils, good books, not spending the money on a tool like a paintbrush can let that process down a little bit. And it's like a lot of hobbies and a lot of trades or skills. Quite often it's the investment in the tools that is the important thing. And skills and techniques can overcome a lot. But if you've got good tools, it makes life a lot easier. So I'm thinking particularly if you've ever renovated a house, you'll know what I'm talking about, and you watch those reno shows and you've struggled with a cheap handsaw and they've got, you know, a full bandsaw or set up where they're just easily cutting through something like it's butter, and you've been sawing away at something for weeks because you know, you don't have that, you'll understand exactly what I'm referring to there. People that sew, you know, they'll know that if you've got really cheap needles and thread, you can have beautiful fabric and make a nice outfit, but if you haven't paid for decent thread, it's going to let the process down. That sounds to me like somebody's cutting a tree down. Alright, I'm sorry, I will have to end this here and I'll come back with part 2 because I don't know what is creating that noise out there. But it's very loud. And now it's stopping again. Okay. I've just looked at the time and we're getting to the hour mark. That's usually about as much as I can upload at a time. So I apologise for that bit of noise there at the end. I will come back and show you how I will finish this page in part 2. Thank you for watching right to the end and putting up with all that background noise, and I will see you really soon. Bye now.